Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Justina Block, and my company, Osmia Bee, is thrilled to be partnering with the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden and Pollination. This is our fourth webinar of our 7 live part series, 5 life lessons from the world of bees. Please keep an eye on your inbox for the link to this recording of today's webinar and resources for more information on our very special guests. I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners and sponsors who helped us promote this event. Our partners, Mpala Research Center, the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden, Pollination, the Plant for Pollinator Challenge, Kroger's Simple Truth. Our supporters, we've had amazing support from our supporters who helped us also promote this event. Wild Birds Unlimited Cincinnati, Bernheim Arboretum and Research Forest is actually the largest arboretum in the US. Edible Ohio Magazine, In the Garden with Vaughn Wilson on Saturdays on WKRC, Winberg Landscaping, Homesdale, a conscious company. They're an online company, great for gifts. And we're very proud to announce Kiss the Ground documentary. The solution is right under our feet, now streaming on Netflix. Green Bean Delivery, my personal favorite that delivers my fresh, organic, local food every week. And Pollinator Portraits, Nature Revisited podcast. Thank you all for your hard work in promoting this event, and welcome. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our special speakers today, Thane Maynard, Director of the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden and the home of Fiona, and Dr. Dino Martins, Executive Director of Mpala Research Center. Welcome, everyone.
Justina, thank you so much. And Dino, it's great to see you again. It's a fun day.
Thank you so much.
You know, here at the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden, we've been lucky to partner on the pollinator reports, and they've really grown and grown. I think today we're at a sellout crowd, Dino, so clearly your reputation precedes you, and I know we're going to have a great presentation. Here at our Botanical Garden, we have a terrific program called Plants for Pollinators, and you can get a certified native garden plaque to put up, and all around the states people have these. We have almost 2,000 people that have certified their gardens from Florida to here in Ohio to California, and we're going to send one to you in Kenya because I know you've got some pollinator plants where you live too. So you know, the work that Dino does mirrors the work that we do here at the zoo. We're around to try to inspire people to get involved and care and learn about nature, and nobody brings it like Dino Martins. On one level, he is a distinguished research scientist with 3 degrees in biology, including a PhD in evolutionary biology from the same program at Harvard University that E.O. Wilson and Ernst Mayr taught for more than a collective century. But he also works with the general public. He has 2 terrific field guides to the insects of East Africa, as well as he works with National Geographic and with kids. A great series. In this case, if you want to grow up to be an entomologist like Dino, what would it take? And I think this combination of big science and really big passion for telling that story is what will make today such a fun time. So thanks everyone for joining. Please write in some questions because we'll do a Q&A toward the end, and Dino will answer the questions that you have. So we're going to have a very fun hour. And Dino, we loved it when you came here to visit and spoke. You charmed everyone, and I know we will certainly have that today. So Dr. Dino Martins, all the way from Kenya.
Thank you so much, Thane, for that wonderful introduction. And I will now share my screen and hope that this all works. So today, I wanted to tell us a little bit about how bees can teach us lessons and share some of the lessons that I've learned myself from the world of bees and from studying pollinators. This is a very strange and interesting and wonderful time. I know it has been an immense challenge for many people around the world. We've been locked down, there's a lot of uncertainty, You know, here in Kenya, we've been lucky in that the pandemic has not had a huge health impact. It has had some of an impact, but our social and economic impact has really been really serious. However, I still think the good things that have come out of this difficult time are that we have learned to reconnect, appreciate, and really think about what is meaningful, what is valuable, and what really matters both for ourselves in our own lives and more broadly as human beings and as societies across this world. This has also been a reminder that we have one planet and we're basically one family. We are all connected. We're all in this together. So today I'm going to share a little bit of insight from the world of bees. And I wanted to start sort of way back in history. And I think one of the most important lessons we can learn from bees is a lesson of history. And this slide shows you one of my favorite examples of mutualism, which is a form of cooperation that has evolved between, in this case, different species. In the background is a painting from an ancient rock art site in East Africa. It's thousands and thousands of years old. And across the world, many, many different cultures have interacted with bees, but especially here in Africa with honeybees. What this shows is people harvesting wild honeybees and running away as they're picking these. In all likelihood, many millions of years ago and many thousands of years ago, people were led to these wild colonies by a bird called the honey guide, which you can see the picture of different species down here. And the most amazing thing is that the honey guide and humans and bees are in this love triangle, and honey guides and humans have a very special communication system that shows that this goes back many, many thousands of years, even longer. And for a long time, people thought that an animal called the honey badger was also involved and that we got involved later. Well, it turns out that's not true. The honey badger is just simply a thief and just a generally stroppy and badly behaved animal who goes off and steals from the bees. But in the case of the humans, when the honey guide leads you to the wild colony, you must actually reward it by leaving some honey for the honey guide, and the honey guide also eats the larvae of the bees. And if you don't do that, next time when the honey guide leads you to look for wild bees, it will punish you and lead you into a buffalo or lead you into trouble. And so many communities have actually developed this in East Africa. And amazingly, still today, there are people who are living in parts of Eastern Africa that go out and have this deep connected relationship with nature. Now, the story of the honey badger is interesting because the misinformation, it turns out, came from a priest who was based in Africa, and he thought he observed this, but he was mistaken. Now, not to put down religion, because the next slide shows you when we could still travel a few years ago, I was very privileged to visit the Vatican and visit Rome and work with the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations on pollinators. Getting into the Vatican is a huge process, waiting in long lines, going through security, but it was absolutely remarkable to see that in the Vatican, you had bees carved into many of the different tombs and the different art and the different sculptures. This one shows you one of the tombs of one of the popes, and the bees come out of the symbol that was part of the Barberini family, who were very important in Rome. And one of the popes many hundreds of years ago, Pope Urban VIII, was from that family. And so then the bees were adopted as a symbol for the papacy, as well as more broadly in Christian theology. Christian symbolism around bees is very interesting because bees seem to represent that both the immortality of life, the seasonality that all life and all individuals and all societies go through, and bees go through this as well, and they live in societies as well. We'll talk about them in a moment. We have, in addition to that, the idea that the bees, the sting is like a judgment. And so if you read writings from that time, it is very interesting to see how symbolic bees were and how connected bees were with human society. One of my favorite stories, though, about bees comes from the San people in Southern Africa. And there are many different myths of origin around the world, but this one is my favorite, and I'll share it with you now. So the world was dark in the very beginning, and the praying mantis had to get across the water, a large body of water, and she couldn't get across. And the bee, who was very kind and generous, offered to carry the praying mantis on her back. So they flew and they set off across the water. And the bee flew and flew, and a storm picked up, and she grew tired, and she could no longer carry the mantis, but she was so determined not to lose her friend. So she flew down and by a miracle landed on a giant flower that was sitting in the water. Exhausted, she curled up and she died. And the mantis and the bee and the flower gave birth to the first people in the world. So that for me is one of the many beautiful stories that we have from the world of bees. And people and bees have been watching each other for many, many thousands of years. So the first life lesson we can learn from bees is the lesson of history and how connected we are. The second lesson that I'd like us to think about is the lesson of how bees and people have worked together and how people have exploited and managed bees. This is a scene from a beehive in Nepal. Again, a few years ago when we could still travel, I visited Nepal as part of our global pollination project, one of the world's most amazing, biodiverse, and incredible countries. And I highly encourage everyone who can to think about visiting and sharing in the sense of wonder and discovery when it is safe to do so again. What was amazing for me in Nepal, especially coming from Kenya, is how gentle the bees were. And the beekeepers were able to open the hives and show us the bees without actually wearing a mask or wearing protective equipment. The bees were very calm. The other amazing thing is there were several different species of honeybee. So we're looking here at the actual comb from one of the hives, and the beekeeper is pointing out the queen bee. And I'll see if you can spot her in this photograph. I'll give you a hint. She's on the right side of the screen. She's larger than the other individual worker honeybees. But what this photo also shows us is the really interesting family life of bees. And so the second lesson we can take from bees that I think is really important is how bees live in families and actually how social creatures come to be and how similar and different that is from our own situation as we live in families and in societies and we interact and cooperate with each other. In the case of honeybees, it's a very remarkable system because all the bees you can see here are female, all are workers, all are sterile, and all are sisters. And they are all daughters of a single queen, the queen who has laid eggs, and she founded this colony with a retinue of workers following her departure from the hive where she was raised in a special queen cell, fed royal jelly by the workers, flew off up into the sky, was chased by the drones, the males, mated with several of them as they exploded and fell to the ground dead. She then flew back down and together in the old hive, replacing the old queen or starting a new colony with a retinue of workers, continues the life of her family. And so bees have this remarkable life cycle and we've learned so much from them. Some years ago, one of the Nobel Prizes was given to Carl von Frisch for figuring out something truly, truly remarkable that continues to puzzle and fascinate scientists today. And that is that bees actually can communicate and share information, and they have a language, just like we have language. But they can do something that no other animals apart from humans can do. Bees can undertake what we call referential communication. So one bee can visit a place, discover a good source of flowers, go back to the hive and tell all her sisters that there's a good source of nectar. Not even animals like chimpanzees can do that. Chimps can go together and show each other food, but one chimp cannot tell another chimp about something that it has seen in the past or in the distance. Now, with honeybees, the way they do this is through something called the Waggle Dance, and it's a wonderfully complex and fascinating behavior that was figured out using experiments, but it's something that all of us have seen, whether you've been on a picnic or opened a pot of honey on your breakfast table and had honeybees come. Very quickly, more arrive, because that individual who first finds the picnic or finds the pot of honey goes off and tells all the others. And bees and people are the only two that can do that. I wanted to share a little bit about our bees in East Africa. And beekeeping is a very important part of our life here. This gentleman is a mzee, an elder in the Mokogodo forest, and he's one of our traditional beekeepers. Many, many different communities in Kenya and across Africa keep bees. The people of the Mokogodo are originally hunter-gatherers and beekeepers, living in the forest alongside many other species and keeping bees in traditional log hives like the one that you can see here. And it's been fascinating. Scientists are coming to study why is it that these bees that live in these more natural conditions do not seem to suffer from the same pests and diseases and viruses that are currently impacting bees that are kept in many other parts of the world in more modern hives. So we still have a lot to learn. And something I'd really like to acknowledge here and celebrate is how much biodiversity is connected with indigenous knowledge. And as a scientist, but as a person who's also grown up in a rural part of Kenya, I really appreciate that we have so much to learn, we have so much to share, and we really need to, as scientists, work more closely with communities of all different kinds, because the more we stand together, the more we can learn from each other. One amazing thing about East Africa and other parts of the world is that there are not only honeybees that are kept and produce honey, there are stingless bees as well. And here is a stingless beekeeper in Tanzania showing me her hive. She's holding the hive on the side of her house, which we wouldn't do with a honeybee hive because they would come out and sting us. And so the wonderful thing are the stingless bees, who are in the same family as the honeybees, but do not sting. They've evolved other forms of defense, also produce honey, are really important pollinators, are very diverse, and have been domesticated by cultures both in Africa as well as in Central America, where these bees occur. And we still have a lot to learn about their biology, and many scientists in Brazil, in Mexico, in East Africa, and in other places are working on understanding these stingless bees. Sadly, in most places, they are becoming rare. And so the stingless bees are a group that are very important. And I just wanted to point out the other lesson I want us to learn from bees today is about diversity. And so we know the honeybee, it's just one species. There are a few other honeybee species that occur in Asia, but across the world, it's one species, Apis mellifera, with lots of different subspecies. Stingless bees are dozens and dozens of different species, and we still know so little about them. So here's a bee drinking water. And in Kenya, in hot, dry areas where beekeeping is very common, water is life, both for bees and people. The lesson I want us to learn from this particular bee and from the act of drinking water is that how connected we are. Bees and people both depend on water. And water around the world is essential for life. In fact, life has evolved without oxygen, but no life that we found has yet evolved without water. As bees drink water, they are able to survive and support themselves, but two other things that come from their drinking of water and from foraging on flowers that are really important are how that drinking of water connects them to the wider world. Some years ago, we had a situation in Kenya where bees and honey were discovered to contain antibiotics. Now, this was a big surprise because the area was completely wild and no one was misusing antibiotics. And after many, many months of visiting and studying, scientists were able to discover that the bees were drinking from a urinal at a clinic. And that's where the antibiotics were getting into the honey. Water today around the world, thanks to the human impact, is increasingly contaminated with antibiotics, with pesticides, with many other chemicals. We today are having a massive impact across the planet. And that is coming back to bite us, literally, in that all these systems are connected. And from bees and from ourselves, we need to learn in nature what goes around comes around. And we need to be better stewards of the land, the water, the soil, the air, and the trees and flowers that we share with the bees. Now, bees make honey, and honey is one of those incredible products that we enjoy all around the world. Here are some of the honeys that we produce here in Kenya, both stingless bee honeys as well as honey from honeybees. Right now, I'm not far from the Arabuko-Sokoke forest, which is a 420 square kilometer forest here on the Kenyan coast, amazingly diverse. And one of the things that helps protect this forest is the honey production around the forest that we support through Nature Kenya. And the closer you are to the forest, the better and the more the quantity of honey that you produce as a beekeeper. So the honey production is very connected with the forest, and honey all over the world is a product that's in great demand, is actually undersupplied. And I just want to note here, as we're talking about bee diversity and keeping that big picture, is that while some bees make honey, not all of them do, but one of the remarkable things about bees is that at all stages of their life, they feed on honey, nectar, pollen, all derived from flowers. Here is a honeybee visiting a sunflower. Sunflowers are a really amazing crop. Just the last couple of days in Kenya here, we've had a wonderful breakthrough where the Kenya Wildlife Service have partnered with a company to grow sunflowers around national parks and promote beekeeping. And the reason for that is actually to reduce conflict with elephants, because elephants, for some reason, don't like to eat sunflowers. I hope that they actually appreciate and like looking at them, but maybe don't like eating them so much. They certainly do like eating other crops. So the cultivation of sunflowers connected to bees, because sunflowers don't produce without pollination, supports farmers, supports conservation, supports livelihoods, and most importantly, supports nature. I think, again, one of the lessons we really need to learn from this time is that we must come up with these win-win solutions and ideas if we're going to continue being successful and connected both with nature as well as rebuilding the world's economy. Here's an example I wanted to share. I've shared this before, but I just wanted to share it again because it's so special to me. This is a coffee flower, and I know that during the pandemic, more coffee has been drunk across the world than ever, and Kenya is one of the world's biggest producers of coffee. Coffee is a really important crop. Coffee originates in Ethiopia, just north of us, and coffee is grown mostly by small-scale farmers like Esther here. Esther is a farmer outside Kakamega Forest in Western Kenya, and I've had the great pleasure of working with her. Esther does so many things that are good for pollinators and good for her crop. This includes things like leaving wildflowers and leaving patches of grass and natural areas around the farm, keeping bees, including stingless bees that help pollinate the coffee flowers, and teaching people like her daughter and many other people in the community, sharing her knowledge about how she works with the coffee. She manages the pests more carefully. She does beekeeping. She looks after her land. And the stewardship provided by millions upon millions of small-scale farmers like Esther across the world are critical for the survival of biodiversity. So the front line of conservation are small-scale farmers like Esther. And while there are sometimes many things that make us sad when we look at the destruction of nature, one of the great joys I've had in working with farmers like Esther is seeing how just a little bit goes a long way, and really connecting people with nature and with food production is one of the most powerful things we can do today. Here is a carpenter bee. This beautiful, beautiful insect is visiting and pollinating the flowers of the coffee Arabica, Kenya's most precious, most expensive, and finest quality coffee. And many studies around the world have shown that it is the diversity of bees and the number of visits that they make to the coffee flowers that actually produces high quality coffee that has a good flavor and a good taste and commands a good price for the farmer. So this connection with nature is absolutely precious. It is fragile, it is tenuous, but it is real. And I hope that through this talk and through us connecting with pollinators, we can continue to learn this lesson, this life lesson from bees as we go forward. So the other lesson that I wanted us to learn is the lesson of diversity. Bees are very, very diverse. You can see here 2 posters that I've made from our work in Turkana, which is way up in northern Kenya. It's a desert, extremely dry and hot, temperatures up to 55 degrees Celsius, that's 135 Fahrenheit at times of year, rain maybe only once every couple of years, just a couple of inches. In contrast, we have Kakamega Forest, a rainforest in Western Kenya. That forest has rain almost every day, hot and humid as well. And the remarkable thing, between these 2 sites, which are different habitats, there's only one species that overlaps, and that is the honeybee in the bees. And isn't it interesting that both bees and humans, honeybees and humans, are so adaptable and so versatile and can live in these incredibly different habitats and different conditions: hot, dry deserts, humid forests, cold northern areas, and have moved across the world so successfully. When we're looking at bee diversity, we have to talk about the relationship of bees with plants and with flowers in particular. Now, bees are important because plants can't move around, but they do need to reproduce, they do need to have sex. And so bees and many other insects enable plants to have sex. And while this may seem like a simple thing, it actually goes back over 100 million years, maybe 130 million years. And bees evolved from wasps, and together with flowering plants have diversified across the world. There's been what we call as scientists an adaptive radiation, an explosion of evolutionary diversity of many, many different intricate behaviors. In this picture here, just one behavior is being captured. Flowers in the plant family for tomatoes, aubergines, eggplant, the Solanaceae, require a very special kind of pollination. The bee has to grab the flower in its mandibles and shake it at a particular frequency. Only then is the pollen released. The bee then goes to another flower, repeats this, and pollination occurs. It's called buzz pollination. Honeybees can't do it. Stingless bees can't do it. Only certain bees, like this beautiful Amegilla bee, can do that particular kind of pollination. If we looked across the plant kingdom, almost 300,000 species of flowering plants, 80% of them are dependent on pollinators. Here's another interesting picture. This is of a lovely bee called Celadonia. Celadonia is almost sort of gold all over its body, and they're tiny bees, but if you look closely in the picture, you'll notice there are some mites that are sitting on the bee. So bees have this incredible relationship with many other species. Some of them are pathogens, some of them are parasites, some of them are helping, some of them are not helping. And we still know so little about those relationships. And that, for me, is really one of the most important lessons about diversity that I'd like us to take home from bees today, is that we really need to understand the intricate connections of life on the planet. And I'd like to pause here and acknowledge that this work has been supported by many different people, and most recently by the Whitley Fund for Nature, who are an amazing charity supporting grassroots conservationists, and also by Milky Wire, which is a social media app platform that helps connect donors directly with conservationists across the world. One of the great joys that I've had working with bees has been to, alongside many different communities and many different groups, discover new species. Now, I know it's controversial to say one has discovered a new species. And in Kenya, many people sometimes get upset when people say they've discovered something, because everyone says, well, what about us? We've been here all along and we knew about that animal. And so, you haven't really discovered it. Well, discovery in a scientific sense is very important. Taxonomy is the part of science that describes living things and assigns them a name that consists of two portions, a genus and a species. Human beings are Homo sapiens, the wise ape or the wise man. In this particular case, we found recently some new bees. We named one Samba turkana. That was found in Turkana in northern Kenya, so it honors the community there. And we are more recently describing a very different group of bees, the Chiasmognathus. And these are amazing because they're actually parasites. They are just like the cuckoo that lays its eggs in other birds' nests. There are many bees who have evolved to lay their eggs in other bees' nests. And that's the case of this amazing Chiasmognathus. And just to show you how tiny they are, you have to watch very closely to find them. You can see in the lower picture here, the tips of a very fine forceps, and that's the size of the bee. Above is the illustration that I've done. So one of the things that I've been working on during this pandemic time is illustrating bees and flowers and grasses. And so I've really been able to catch up on some of that. And I'm looking forward to finishing a book on the bees of East Africa soon. And that will be available freely online to download. We do have a book on pollinators that is available, and the link will be shared with you after this lecture. I wanted to talk a little bit about my last trip to the Cincinnati Zoo, and it was just so wonderful to be there and to meet everyone and to see the work that the zoo in an urban area is doing as a botanical garden, as a hotspot for biodiversity. And so the lesson I also want us to learn from bees is a lesson about kindness, a lesson about doing things in our backyard and doing things with our neighbors, because we are all part of communities. And whether you live in a city or on a farm, or you're way out in a distant remote area in a rainforest or in a savanna, whether you're here in Kenya or in the US, you can do something for bees and for nature. Bees need our help. And work being done by Osmia Bee and Justina and many others around the world and in the Midwest around bees like mason bees, which have nests that you can put up or you can cultivate habitat from there, you can provide flowers for them to feed on, makes a big difference. These are special bees. They have intriguing life cycles. They're great fun to watch. So please, if you have the time or the ability, do a little bit for bees. Build a bee hotel. Plant some wildflowers. Leave even a corner of your lawn to be natural. Stop using pests for bees. The leafcutter bees are one of my favorite bees, and they are very common across the world. And they build their nest, they weave leaves together. Sometimes they cut flower petals and join them up together and then make their little nest. Inside that reed or inside that hole will be a larva that the bee will have collected pollen shaped it into a little loaf, and stored it there for her larva to feed on. And so bees are really remarkable in the different ways that they nest. Many of them nest in cavities, in holes, in reeds and stems, but many more actually nest in the ground. And so what we do to the soil, to the ground beneath our feet, how we treat it, how we cultivate it, how chemicals move through water into soil has really massive ramifications for millions and millions of species and for thousands and thousands of species of bees. This is the last slide that I wanted to show you today. And just to remind you that there are 25,000 species of bees. Most of them are solitary, and we've talked about bees, we've mostly talked about the females. Well, what do the males get up to? Well, this is a solitary bee species, an Amegilla. The females make individual nests, which they go and fill with pollen and lay their eggs, and the larvae develop. But what do the males do? They don't live in the nests with the females. So the males get a little bit lonely. And you will find that in the evenings, even though they're a solitary species, groups of males will gather together and sleep, sometimes even holding on to each other on stems of grass or other vegetation. And so I just wanted to end with that and say, please pay attention to bees. Bees are very connected with us. We can learn many lessons from bees, how connected we are to nature, you know, not just through pollination and the food we eat, but through how we've evolved, our behavior, our appreciation for diversity. And we really need to learn about kindness and empathy for each other and towards nature, towards animals, even towards insects. And finally, you know, that there's so much out there to discover. The diversity of insects, the diversity of nature is a library that is open to all of us that we can access and celebrate and be part of. And even 5 minutes spent watching a bee will change your life. Thank you.
That was so great, Dino. Thank you. You can imagine lots of people are sending in questions, and we'll get to some of those, but I really loved your celebration about the diversity of bees. For many people, they just think about honeybees or maybe bumblebees and might not have heard of others. But to hear that there are 25,000 species and that they help pollinate the majority of the world's plants is really something. It's something to celebrate, but also is something to protect. One of the questions that came in was that we've heard a lot about locusts in Kenya and East Africa, and we're hoping that people aren't spraying so many pesticides that it ends up killing the good insects as well.
Thank you. That's a very important question. So for many different reasons, climate change, change in weather patterns, and this amazing extra rainfall that East Africa had with cyclones over the last year, swarms of locusts that have appeared that haven't been present in this particular part of the world for a long time. Now, locusts are remarkable creatures. I mean, like many insects, they are tough, they've been around for a long time, and they normally live in deserts, but now they've spread out of the deserts and into areas where people are growing crops and other things are happening. So a massive effort has been undertaken to control the locusts, which does involve spraying pesticides. However, they are trying to do it with minimal impact. So the chemicals are used in very strict ways, and where possible, a biopesticide made from a fungus that does not affect other insects but only affects locusts is being used. But this shows you the importance of understanding nature. There are several other potential solutions out there for locusts, but the investment was never made in the research. Young scientists didn't go into those fields in enough numbers and follow up those questions and spend the years and sweating and learning. If we had done more of that, we would have more solutions now. And just like we've used science to solve the terrible problem of COVID-19, we need science across all aspects of nature and biodiversity, because it's not just the survival of bees, it's our survival that's at stake as well.
It certainly is. And you know, the interesting thing about your work in Kenya is when many people think of East Africa, they think of big animals and they want to go on safari and see lions and elephants. And of course, most people that aren't in East Africa don't ever run into lions or elephants or know what to do to help them. And yet we all do run into pollinators. You did a great job at the end talking about the things that people can do themselves. I mentioned that our botanical garden has a Plants for Pollinators challenge, and you can register your garden. And the fun thing about that is twofold. One is when you put that little sign up and you have it and your neighbors say, well, what's that? What do you mean native plants and plants for pollinators? And so you're sort of educating your neighbors who know you and trust you. But to me, the fascinating part is if you plant some plants, literally within a month, or certainly when it's flowering season, you will see bees, you will see birds, you'll see butterflies, caterpillars in such an abundance is just as good as going on safari.
Absolutely. And plants and insects interacting around us have many impacts that we don't even yet quite know about. There's some evidence emerging that just having plants in the environment around you has positive impacts on our health, both our mental health and our physical health. More than half the world's population today lives in cities. Mm-hmm. And cities are often thought as areas that don't have access to nature. And that's not true. Both in Cincinnati and in many cities around the world, people are proving that you can do little things that make a huge difference for creatures around us, but for us ourselves. And so redesigning what we think of as cities and urban areas, and really seeing that there isn't a boundary between us and nature. Any space that we can create for nature, nature is resilient. She's really tough. She'll take advantage of that space, but we do have to give her the space.
Absolutely, and learn to live with nature rather than sort of fight it. Somebody wrote in a question because they liked your part on the stingless bees. Many people had not heard of those, and they asked, is the honey the same as from regular honeybees?
Stingless bees produce honey that is similar in some ways. It's sweet, it's sugary because it's food for them and their larvae, but also in some cases quite different. Stingless bees may gather different resins. Some of them go to different plants. This affects the constituents of the honey, and it ends up being medicinal in some cases. So in parts of Kenya, there's stingless bee honey that is used to treat wounds that don't heal. In other parts of the world, stingless bee honey is used in various ceremonies. And stingless bee honey is now increasingly available even in health food stores as well as in other stores. And it is actually not just an important part of the local economy, but growing into the global economy as well.
That's exciting. As I said before, we have a tremendous numbers of people participating today, over 530 people tuning in for this webinar with lots of questions. One was, are your books available from Amazon?
Both the children's book as well as the field guides are available. And I just wanted to note, the reason I did the field guides is when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of information about insects and butterflies, and I really wanted to identify them. I did have a guidebook to the mammals of East Africa, which have been around for a long time. But having those guidebooks, knowing and recognizing things around you is actually a very important part of nature. We have evolved to recognize lots of different species because that has inherently been part of our history and our connection with the world around us. And being able to say, I know what that tree is, that flower, or that insect is actually saying a lot about you as a person and your connection and recognition of the sanctity of life and of the detail of life. And that for me is the core of empathy, something that's really important. And that's what's led me to write more children's books. So in addition to the You Can Be an Entomologist book, which was done by National Geographic, I'm working on a number of other children's books for Penguin Random House. They all are around animal characters, and hopefully those will be completed later this year. Something else good that's come out of me having a little bit of extra time to write and draw these past few months.
Well, we have folks tuning in from the Netherlands and other parts of Europe, from other areas in Africa and here throughout North America, and all with lots and lots of questions. One was about that some bees have a bad reputation and are perceived as pests. They said that carpenter bees in urban areas can get that, that sort of a thing. So are they considered a pest in Africa and other places where they occur?
That's a very actually important question. Bees, honeybees in particular, have been introduced to some parts of the world. Honeybees were not native to North America. So honeybees have been spreading through parts of North America. But more importantly today, there are companies that are producing bees for commercial pollination, bumblebees in particular, and shipping them around the world. And very sadly, in some cases, those introduced bumblebees have introduced diseases that have gone off to kill native bumblebees. So the best thing of all is to actually work with the local diversity you have. There are so many thousands of species of bees, both in the Midwest and here in Kenya. Work with what you have. It's far better than bringing in things from far away, which might cause problems since they're not part of the local ecology.
Well, that's an important lesson all around, because among the many challenges, introduced species, whether those are plants or fish, or in your case, insects, they end up having an impact sometime that was not intended. And once that takes root, it's awful hard to change or take out. Another question was, is there evidence of prehistoric bees? And if so, were they similar or different to the ones today?
That's a great question. So bees as a group and ants both evolved from wasps, and ants, bees, and wasps are all classified together, but wasps are the most ancient part of this amazing group of insects. Bees that were more primitive appear to have been evolving out of wasps, and the key thing with bees that really changed is that while many insects visit flowers, bees are the one group who not only depend on flowers for food and sustenance as adults, but they also feed pollen and nectar and oils and other things they take from flowers to their young. And so this has been a very amazing breakthrough for the bees that has allowed them to co-evolve with plants around the world. And some of the bees have a Gondwanan origin. So they are ancient. They come out of this time when dinosaurs were still roaming the earth, and all the continents of Africa, India, South America were joined together. And that's the origin of bees. And we are working with a large group of scientists, and it's a wonderful part of biology that we have the tools today. We can look at the genetics of bees, their genomes. We can sequence their DNA. There aren't so many fossils, but there are a few. And all of these little bits of the puzzle allow us to get this bigger picture of what bees are and who they are. But they are so important to us today. We could not survive. Many other species could not survive without bees.
Absolutely. Now, a number of people have expressed interest in the stinging. Some have asked how often you've gotten stung by bees and which one might have been worse, which species. But the other fascination was with your stingless bees, about how would they defend themselves if they're not able to sting?
That's a great question. And yes, many bees do sting. The sting is, a modified part of the egg-laying structure of the bee, and wasps sting, and some ants sting. And so this stinging of bees is part of their ancient lineage. Now, honeybees sting once, and the sting breaks out. It's very famous because if one stings you, it releases a chemical, the alarm pheromone, which attracts other honeybees, and that individual sacrifices her life to protect the colony. And of course, it's very frightening. If you get stung, you get chased by lots of other bees because they're following that pheromone that's been released. Now, stingless bees have lost the ability to sting, but they do have other ways of defending their colony. And one is by biting, so they can actually take little nips at you. The other way is by cleverly hiding the nest, especially from ants, covering it with resin. And then when all else fails, crawling inside the nostrils and ears of whoever's trying to bother them, which is extremely off-putting. And so usually that stops anyone from trying to mess with them if they're trying to do that.
And it explains why even elephants sometimes don't like bees. Someone from the UK who's viewing wrote in, please tell some more about the Whitley Fund for Nature. And I know you're now a trustee for that group.
Oh, thank you. I'm just in the process of being appointed to the Whitley Fund for Nature trustees. I'm hugely honored. I received a Whitley Award some time ago. And the Whitley Fund for Nature is a grassroots charity supporting conservationists around the world. The patrons are Her Royal Highness, the Princess Anne, and Sir David Attenborough, who's our absolute hero for all of us. And the most important thing with the Whitley Fund is that it works and supports people who are actually in the field, and the bulk of the money provided goes directly to people leading the solutions in the countries, working on everything from, caring for animals, for endangered species, whether they're in captive breeding situations, looking at systems, looking at communities, looking at economies. It has a really integrated approach, and it really is one of the most high impact charities out there. And so I'm hugely honored to be joining the trustees of the Whitley Fund for Nature.
That's a great honor and well-deserved on your part too. Someone wrote in that you said that bees evolved from wasps, and the question was, what are the differences between bees and wasps?
That's a great question. So there are many bees that are very wasp-like, and there are a few wasps that are very bee-like. And so even scientists sometimes will struggle to recognize. But one of the basic things is that bees have hairy bodies. And if you look at the hairs on bees, they are feathery and they're spread out. Whereas wasps have hairs, but their hairs are single, long and thin. So that's one difference. The other thing as scientists we joke about is that bees have what we call a bee face, and wasps have a wasp face. And the wasp face is generally quite meaner looking than the bee face. And if you looked at them up close, basically you would see that the antennae of bees are located more centrally in their head, which gives them a much rounder, more balanced, more friendly face. Whereas wasp faces tend to be much more austere and narrow and menacing, if that makes sense.
And many wasps are predators as well.
That's correct. Wasps are actually incredibly important. They are predators, they are parasites, and their diversity is immense. We still know almost nothing about them in most parts of the world. In a garden, wasps and hornets are sometimes a nuisance, but they're also incredibly important. They feed on caterpillars, they feed on many other insects. They're very useful as predators to control pest species. And then some wasps are pollinators as well. And other wasps help by actually laying their eggs inside the bodies of insects, including caterpillars, including other species that are causing harm to plants. And then alien style, the larvae feed on the living tissue and burst out through the skin of the caterpillar and hatch out and go on to continue the cycle. So intricate, gory, and wonderful all at once.
It's like a science fiction movie. And when you talked about stinging and of course biting, it reminded me of some insects people don't like. For instance, mosquitoes. I once had falciparum malaria, and that isn't a good thing. And of course, tsetse flies, my least favorite insect. Thank you very much. They'll bite you right through your shoe. And yet even those animals are important.
They are incredibly important. Of all the thousands of mosquito species, only a few dozen transmit diseases. Those are important and we need to understand them. And then the tsetse fly is one of my favorite insects.
There you go.
Because the female carries the larva and feeds it from a nipple on her chest and goes off and gives birth to it. It's one of the most remarkable examples of maternal care that has evolved in insects, very similar to that in mammals.
And it's one of the toughest animals in the world. Buddy, you try to kill a tsetse fly, they're hard to get. I'll tell you what. So a few more questions. Let's see. Someone said, okay, in the face of industrialization, urbanization, and climate change, how does it really help if you just plant some native plants?
That's a great question. Well, I think the first thing it does is that it helps us. Plants around us create a better feeling of peace, of calm, of security. Green leaves release chemicals that many studies are starting to show are actually really important for our health. And even that small bit of habitat in an urban area can be really important for the survival of many different species. One amazing thing is that beekeepers in urban areas in Europe produce better honey than in areas with lots of agriculture because no one uses pesticides in the urban areas. So that's another important aspect, is that any small space, even with urbanization, even with development, we can leave space for nature, and it can be a win-win for us and for nature, which we are part of.
Yeah, that's remarkable. A number of the people watching, of course, are beekeepers, and they have asked questions about those native nests. It looked like they were done in a hollow log. Is there good information of how someone might try to do that?
We can share some information, and if you go to the websites and information that we'll share, there are many traditions around beekeeping in different parts of the world, and that we'll make that available online. But the traditional log hives are one of the most ancient forms of beekeeping, and are something that actually I think bees evolved in a more tropical environment, honeybees. And so living in those kinds of hives in a seasonal environment might be more challenging. But everywhere that people keep bees, the wonderful thing is that people relate to the bees, they learn about them, the bees learn from people, and they survive together.
Absolutely. Well, Dino, thank you for this. It's been a wonderful time. And we're back to Justina Block.
Thank you so much, Thane, and thank you, Dino. This was exciting. We just, as you can see on our screen, we just are showing you the books that Dino has written, and you can find them again on Amazon. Is there another source, Dino, that people can find them?
Amazon is probably the easiest source.
Okay.
The book on pollinators, Our Friends the Pollinators, is available free to download online, and we can share the link after the talk.
That would be great. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank everyone so much, to all our viewers for making this very successful. And I'd like to thank again our supporters who helped this webinar, promoting it, and their amazing dedication and effort. And Dino, again, thank you for sharing your wisdom and about the wonderful people and that you're working with, the foundations, that they're so fortunate to have you. That's fantastic. So thank you for sharing with us the importance of humans and bees and that interact in our world. It's very inspiring and exciting for a better future. And Thane, thank you for your expertise and support. We really appreciate you and everything you've done for the Pollinator Report and the Plant for Pollinator program, and just what you do for the community as a whole here in Cincinnati and really across the world. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank Christina Anderson, Executive Assistant to Thane Maynard and a coordinator for the Plant for Pollinator Challenge. We would never get through this webinar off the ground without you and your impeccable organization. So thank you. And thanks again to everyone. Dino will have links, so no one, don't worry. We have links that if we did not answer your question, you can actually reach out to Dr. Dino Martins. You could also reach out to Christina Anderson for more information, how you can register your plant for Plant for Pollinators Challenge here in Cincinnati. So we're very excited, as you can see in the back. I just heartfelt thank you. I'm just so appreciative that you're here, and this very exciting presentation. And I wish everyone well, and be safe during this COVID time. And thank you. Any last words or comments?
Thank
our
you,
audience?
Justina. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share. And I look forward to sharing in person at some point in Cincinnati. And
That's
thank
right.
you to our.
Come back over.
Thank you. Thank you to our audience. Thank you, Thane. Thank you, Dino. Take care. Be well. Until next time, we'll see you on the Pollinator Report.
Thanks.
Thank you.